Hi, Sarah at Nova Motorcycles again. Today we're working on another really cool old English single-cylinder motorcycle. This is a 1951 Norton International, 500 cc's, basically a top-of-the-line bike of its day. If you remember, a few months back we did a BSA Gold Star. This is similar time period, similar technology, although this would have been considered maybe the Mercedes of the era, whereas the BSA Gold Star is sort of the hot rod Chevy of the era. Couple things that are really amazing about this bike and unusual for its time is that this is an overhead cam engine, something that the Brits did not do on a production bike ever again until the reintroduction of Triumph in the 90s. So it was really advanced for its time. Overhead cams were pretty much reserved for racing bikes, one-off bikes, very special high-performance machines, stuff that the public couldn't buy. So this was a saying by Norton's is to say, hey, look what we can do. Kind of normal of its time, probably from the 30s onward is until the 50s, is these exposed valves here. These valve springs are referred to as hairpin valve springs because they look like old hairpins. And the valves themselves are running out here in the atmosphere. You can see there's some oil mist that happens. It's kind of unavoidable on something like this. But this was the way they did it. Grit can get in here. It's the reasons we don't do this anymore is that grit can get in there, and it's not really great. The reason we have this bike in the shop is that it leaks too much oil, so we have to go through and try to minimize what it's leaking. But it does keep things pretty cool. Air flows right over the valve stem, and that keeps everything cooled down. So given a certain horsepower limitation, it worked. It worked for its time. It also has a bevel-drive to the camshaft. This whole thing here on a typical Brit bike, that would be holding the push rods. But this is a long shaft, which comes up here and bevels into another shaft, which is your camshaft at a 90-degree angle. Pretty advanced for its time. Ducati did the same thing with its bevel drives later on in the 60s into the 70s, up until they did the rubber band motors in the early 80s. So a lot of cool stuff happening here that was ahead of its time. Not ahead of its time, apropos of its time and the time before, is this Lucas electrical setup. It's a 6-volt generator on top of a Mag-Dyno bolted together called the Mag-Dyno. Very much what the Gold Star had. And drives a pretty simple system where you just have a headlight and a tail light and a brake light and a horn, and that's about it for the electrical system. We did in the past on this bike, we've put in a modern solid state regulator, which really helps just keep everything humming along. But the whole thing is pretty limited electrically. Kind of basically what was happening for the Brits in that time period. Another odd thing about this bike is the tires. They're 20-inch rims. Virtually impossible to find anything for it. When we pulled it apart to change a tire, it had a 21-inch tube crammed into it. We decided we'd rather have a 19-inch tube stretched to do it, so we did that, and it holds up perfectly fine. But again, very hard to find tires for this. I think one of them is an old English tire. The other is a Chengshin, which magically was available in that size. Otherwise, there's just not much out there. Probably one company in the world now at this point in time, making tires for this size. So not a whole lot more to talk about with it. I will point out it has a plunger frame like the BSA B33 we showed a few weeks back as well. Similar sort of intermediate between hardtails and swing arm frames. So that was the time. That was modern tech for a certain period. They work okay, not great. And then our goal with this thing is to make it oil tight, which is hard enough on the average British bike, but on this thing we actually have to rebuild the cam box, which there's not a lot of information out there for. Not really manuals. If you look at the factory manual for this, it says return to the Norton factory for service. Not going to happen this day and age. The Norton factory does not exist in the way it used to. So it'll be interesting, but it'll be a lot of fun, and we love working on these old things. So yeah, thanks for watching. As usual, like, subscribe, share with your friends. Thanks a lot.